Wish they'd locate the source of those cases.
What I was going to say is we might tie in our meeting with Marty Bowman. This is continuation. I'm a board member on the River group. We kind of extended that.
Thank you. Okay.
It's time now for the Casey Ingram Show on WSTU. The opinions expressed are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WSTU. WSTU does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WSTU. It's time to call in with your questions and comments at 220-9788, 220-WSTU. And now, here's Casey.
Tired of lines at the boat launch, sun damage, or not using your boat because of the hassle? Call Meridian Marina and Yacht Club because we do all the work so you can enjoy your boating lifestyle. We store your boat inside, launch it with a wash with just 30 minutes notice, and rinse it down before putting it back. Need new electronics, service, detailing, bottom paint? No problem. Our experienced certified techs will make sure your boat is in tip-top shape and ready to head to the sandbar, fishing, or the Bahamas. Call us up at 772-221-8198. That's 221-8198, or visit us online at meridianmarina.com for more details. In the studio this evening, we have a repeat guest, and I'm very happy that we have a board member of Indian Riverkeeper, the Riverkeepers Association, Paul Laura, back in the studio. And if you remember, Marty Baum and Paul Laura were here in the studio a couple weeks ago, and we were talking a lot about the water issues and legislation surrounding Lake Okeechobee discharges. And honestly, Paul, we ran out of time, so thank you for coming back.
You're welcome.
So we have a lot to cover here this evening.
Thanks for letting me come back.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. It's very informative. There's a lot of buzz about Lake Okeechobee this year. We've had a lot of work with Congressman Mast, really bringing a lot of our issues to the forefront. And so, let's just step back 1 second and let's talk about maybe the economic impact that the St. Lucie estuary has.
All right. So I've been able to have the opportunity to work with Gary Goforth. So some of these numbers and figures that I'm going to give have been updated by him. So we have at the St. Lucie estuary contributes 27,000 jobs and $840 million per year.
Wow.
And Caloosahatchee contributes 50,000 jobs and $8 billion per year. So you can see the importance of clean water in Florida.
Very important. That's an incredible contribution. Certainly something worth fighting for that we have been doing for decades. So what's on the forefront here? We'll talk a little bit more about the pollution, but let's talk about the legislation that is in play of curbing the Lake Okeechobee discharges.
Sure. I think the most important, there are two bills. One's more related to pollution. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But if we're talking about what has happened on the federal effort side, WRDA 2018, which was passed in December of last year and signed by the president, that is probably the most significant issue on the federal side. There are a number of state bills this year, thanks to Governor DeSantis's input and trying to get more quality water. And so we have a number of bills that are in play here. But the problem with the state government is that it's still being discussed, and we don't have a final idea of what's going to come out of the Senate and what's going to come out of the House. So I think we really have to wait until May.
Okay.
And then we'll have a better understanding of just how much influence Governor DeSantis has had. He's certainly walking the talk. But the problem is what will be the reality as far as the state government coming to a finality of some of these bills, and will they be pro-environment, will they clean the water, or will they still be so watered down that they are essentially ineffective?
And that has been in the past some of the concern you've had with some of the bills. Does one bill really cover more information than one that's already been passed, or is it going to do more to clean the water than one that's already been passed? Some of these bills, and let me step back before I go into the bills again, but WRDA is basically the federal government authorizing projects.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's funding.
Yes, that's correct. And there's still, this is a little bit hazy, but it doesn't seem like they got all the funding that they wanted. So there is a request now to have a $200 million annual contribution by the government. And certainly Representative Mast is working on this, as well as some of the other representatives around the state, including our senators as well. And if they can successfully get the the president to sign off on this, that would be really helpful. $200 million. Now, where they got this idea from was some time ago up in the Great Lakes, where they have the similar problem. They were able to get a monetary amount of $200 million every year. So they're trying to duplicate that down here.
Which would be very helpful. And one of the other things, this isn't necessarily a bill, but is the Army Corps of Engineers is reviewing the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule. I'll talk about that briefly with you. It's called LOSM now.
Right.
You know, what is your opinion of LOSM? Because they want to lower the Lake Okeechobee levels possibly to 9.5 feet, send water south ahead of the rainy season, same water that's in there right now. Is that something that you see as a positive benefit, or something that needs to be looked into more or revised?
This is a really difficult question. So if you talk to someone like Dr. Paul Gray, who's with the Audubon, who has really monitored Lake Okeechobee for many years, he is indicating that probably the average level should be about 12 feet, where currently its minimum level is 12.5. He's saying go to 12 feet. However, there are other people who said, if we really want to reduce the amount of pollution, meaning algal blooms, we need to lower the lake more so that it has more time to build up to stop the discharges coming into St. Lucie River. Because Caloosahatchee always needs some water, but we don't need any. And so what we really need is just clean water, and that's our objective, is to stop discharges and clean the water ourselves in the local runoff area.
Okay. What bills do you see on the federal level that we should either be watching or supporting, or ones that have already passed that need funding that you feel are a priority?
I really think that WRDA just needs to be implemented. And of course, there are still special interests that really are not wanting that to occur because they don't want water going south.
Okay.
And I don't want to pinpoint any specific industry, because actually there are probably more than one industry that's doing that. But certainly, we have always looked at the sugar industry as part of that, but there are other industries that are contributing to this. Well, you do, it's not just sugar also. Of course, we have a lot of vegetable growth that is occurring in the EAA, for example. And these are people who are concerned about their livelihood. And I think we have not really adequately communicated to them some security if some of that land is bought up or used to build a reservoir. They're concerned about their livelihood, and I'm really sympathetic to that.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about what are the pollutants that comes into Lake Okeechobee.
Okay, so basically what we're really talking about, you can talk about hormones coming in, but I think basically we're concentrating more on phosphate and nitrogen. Right? So if we look at the amount of nutrients coming in, it's about 63% is coming in from agricultural land. And the total estimated runoff of just the water part, is about 86%. So you have 86% of the water, and of that, 63% of phosphorus and nitrogen are contributed as far as the pollution coming in down to Lake Okeechobee. Now, what the problem is that it's not just fertilizer. Many people just blame the agriculture industry. I've taken a different position on this and indicated that really what we're talking about here is human waste. Governor Scott stopped measuring human waste being deposited on agricultural lands in 2013.
Now, what the problem
Part
is,
of the problem is that if you don't have data, you can't really come up with a constructive argument. So that's another one of the things that he did was stopping the recording. But this has to be one of the primary drivers, because if you take the cattle industry over the last, say, 10 years, it's basically static. It hasn't really grown. It hasn't really not grown. If you look at fertilizer, unfortunately, the data that I have only goes up to 2012 or 2013. It shows that actually fertilizer was going down. The one thing that is going up is the population.
Right, absolutely.
And people just think that if you have a septic system, that if we converge to sewer systems, the problem is resolved. And this is the biggest myth, because they have to put somewhere all that waste that's accumulated at the waste treatment plants. And Florida has a goal. 70% of human waste is to go on agricultural land.
70%.
70%.
Human waste, and then it returns runoff, basin
Right.
runoff.
It's just a loop that just comes back, and then it hits us, and we have the algal blooms as a result of it.
And this is a lot of the nutrients coming in Lake Okeechobee. And Paul, I want to talk a little bit more about that and what else can we do with human waste. But let's take a real short break and we'll discuss that.
Is that okay? The other thing that WERDA did was it restores the Kissimmee Winding River. It also ensures the Hoover Dike system.
Okay.
That too. We come back to that as long as we know.
Okay, I think that's a big thing to talk about. And the next word is 2020, right?
Yes, that's under WERDA. And WERDA, as well as this other bill that I was talking about, this harmful algal bloom and hypoxia research and control.
Back in chat. Okay, we are back with Paul Laura in the studio. We're talking about Lake Okeechobee discharges. We're talking about some legislation in WERDA that impacts those discharges, hopefully funding for some of the bills that are out there to help clean up or find different ways, whether it's restoring the dike, improving the dike. There was a couple other things. We'll get back to that here in a moment, Paul. But we were talking about human waste, and you had mentioned 70% of it is spread over the agricultural fields. And of course, we have runoffs from storms that comes right back into the basin, into the estuaries. It's actually a really big problem. So what else can we do with our human waste?
Right. One of the efforts that we're trying to, Dr. Goforth and myself, was trying to reach out to Nikki Freed, who's been very, very helpful in trying to explain the problem.
Our new agricultural commissioner here in Florida.
I'm sorry, yes, Commissioner of Agriculture. And we're going to be meeting with her again. But what we want to suggest is that we have to find another application for human waste. With a goal of Florida of 70%, and we don't know what the actual number is because Governor Scott stopped recording that in 2013, but we know it's significant. And the point we're trying to say is let's look at other applications. And some people have said, well, we could actually put it into bricks for construction. But one of the ones that's kind of got my interest is one called the Janaki Omniprocessor. And the Janaki actually has a working model in Senegal, Africa, and it is working. And basically, it converts solid into energy and the liquid into fresh water. So this seems to fit pretty well with what we want for Florida, because we're always going to have a water issue, and we also, of course, need electricity, and this is, I would call it renewable.
Right, it certainly is.
So,
unending source, it seems.
So basically, they have demonstrated the model, and some of the scientific groups have actually talked to them, and I have talked to them, and it seems like it's a doable thing. But we need grant money to do this. So hopefully we'll be able to convince Commissioner Freed or Representative Mast or somebody to give us a working grant for money to be able to make this type of prototype. And the economics are not bad. I talked to the CEO of Janicki. They're out in Washington State, by the way.
Okay.
And they were funded by the Gates Foundation.
Oh, okay.
That's how they came about on this project. So what ended up happening was I asked them, how much do we need for Martin County, for example? And he said, I told him how much the population, 150,000 or so. And he said, maybe one, maybe two. So I said, okay, let's say two. How much is it going to cost? He said, $28 million. I said, okay. What's the return on investment of that? Because we're going to sell electricity, we're going to have fresh water, which we'll be selling, and the only thing that looks like we have to do is dispose of the ash, which has some heavy metals potentially in it. And he said 3 to 4 years. Now, in a commercial world, and that's where my experience is, that's a really good return on investment. So then after that, the county or counties who have this particular facility would have a steady stream of income coming in once they pay it off.
Okay.
So I'm very encouraged, and I'm hoping that we can get more interest in this in this year.
I have a comment here from one of the listeners, Nyla Pipes. I know she's with OAF. She said Class B biosolids were banned in the Lake Okeechobee, St. Lucie, and Caloosahatchee watersheds in 2012. So Class B biosolids are.
Yes, Class B is, but not double A.
Okay.
So there's
Tell me
this.
the difference. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go into that. I won't.
Okay.
I do know, but I won't tell you. But
Sounds complicated.
because you asked me not to. But the point really is, and Nyland I think is aware of this, is that there are, once you convert it to double A, then that opens it up again.
Okay.
So yes, we don't want Class B because of the bacteria that's related to that. But it doesn't affect the phosphorus or nitrogen levels.
So it depends on classification levels.
Yes.
Okay, very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the WRDA again. What more, we talked about WRDA, it's coming back to the federal legislature in 2020. What more does WRDA do?
Well, WRDA also helps to restore the Kissimmee River winding. As you know, the Corps of Engineers in the 60s made a straight shot from Orlando on down to Lake Okeechobee. And now they've started to put the winding in, and they're almost completed. But even though they're almost completed, my understanding is it'll never have the complete winding that it once did. But it will be a help. And the winding is necessary because it helps to reduce the phosphorus and the nitrogen. Right? And because of the plant life that's along the river. So this will be a help in reducing the pollution. The other thing is, of course, is the Hoover Dike system itself. And they are repairing that so that it's more resistant and the fear of some sort of breach will be reduced.
Now, Paul, I know Marty was very adamant when he was in the studio here previously, but, you know, as it stands with the water, with the pollutants that are in it, if they're able to just send it south, more of it south, you know, he had mentioned you just can't put that problem in somebody else's backyard.
Right. Both Marty and I are very strong in our feelings and passionate about that. That is that we have to be careful that whatever we do, we just don't give somebody else the same problem. We have to set a better example than that. And I'm hoping that we would accomplish that.
Paul, is there any legislation out there that is going to mandate like a point of source pollution level? You know, we talk about all the pollutants that are coming in from the north of Lake Okeechobee. So it seems to me there ought to be some sort of legislation out there that there's going to be testing along the shores. Where's it coming from and why are you allowing it to come into the river?
There actually is some legislation, but the recent rewording of it is not encouraging, at least for me personally. There's a House bill in the state, 405, which was introduced by Representative Grawl, and another equivalent to that by Senator Mayfield up in Brevard County, Senate Bill 1278. Initially, it was covering the point source for the St. Johns River, but when it got into the subcommittee, from what I read, they said that it actually was expanded for the whole state. But the problem is that now they have new wording, which Senator Mayfield introduced into her own bill, which said, well, it's more best practices and voluntary, okay? And the problem with that is we've already gone through that experience. Representative Caldwell in 2015 introduced House Bill 7005. And basically what it did is it made it voluntary and best practices for point source of nutrients. And it's the next year we had the largest bloom and the largest amount of pollution in Lake Okeechobee. So we have to find another solution to that. And I don't know if we'll have the will to do that. And that's why I'm hoping we can maybe take it by taking parts of it and reducing it. And that's where the human waste comes into play, because it's a significant driver. It's one of the largest contributors to nutrient. And if we can help to use another application, that would be a significant reduction in the amount of nutrient going in. We'll still have fertilizer probably,
Right.
and other sources of pollution. But this is really a big one. And if we could find another application, I think it would have really very impactful. It would be very impactful.
And I know the Indian River County that itself is dealing a lot with biosolids. And you mentioned
Blue
Representative
Cypress
Burrell.
Lake you're talking about.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And Representative Burrell and Mayfield represent that area. So it's definitely something that's
And that is
important.
Class B, by the way.
It is. Up
Yeah.
there, it's not a
That
B.
is
So,
Class B.
okay. Certainly a huge problem. And, with some of the options you were bringing up, is it economical?
Well, I'm only going by the numbers that were given to me by the CEO, and he said that the return on investment is 3 to 4 years. Now, my understanding from the commercial world, that means that the economics are really pretty favorable. But it would depend, of course, on a couple of variables. One of them would be what would Florida Power and Light, for example, give for power that was generated from this application. And maybe they'd say the standard rate, but maybe the legislature could sweeten it up so it makes this particular type of electricity produced from renewable waste, if you will, something more sweeten the pot for them, so that they're more interested in buying that power. And of course, then the counties get more money for that.
Which is all, of course, a good thing as well. With that being said, what is your opinion on converting septic to sewer? Because as you just said, converting septic to sewer, but then the sewer is spread as biosolids on the fields. So
Well, I've looked at that quite extensively, because there are different research people who have come out. I think it depends really on the location. So down here in the southern part of the lagoon, it's not as much of a factor, but it is an increasing factor up in the northern part of Indian River Lagoon. They don't have the tidal interaction that we have here in the south. They have almost no tidal action up there, and that's why there's some discussion about opening up there. But until they do, I think the turnover, if I remember correctly, and I'm getting this from the Marine Resources Council up there in Melbourne, I believe it's like 2 years, and it actually takes 2 years for them to go through a complete cycle. Where us, it's a couple of weeks, couple of months, at most, depending upon, how much interaction is coming in from the ocean. So that's the reason why septic systems may have less influence here. We just may not see it.
if they're able to clean up the pollutants coming into Lake Okeechobee and the water's cleaner, would you support more water being sent south then?
Well, our position is we need to have clean water because clean water, polluted water coming out of Lake Okeechobee doesn't solve the problem. It creates a whole list of other problems for Native Indians and also the Miami-Brevard, Miami-Dade area that they're going to have to deal with. So we need to find a way to clean it up before it gets too far south.
And with that also being said, we touched on it previously, but we have a new South Florida Water Management District Board, of course. The previous board was very supportive of deep injection wells and aquifer storage recovery wells. My understanding, the deep injection wells shoot it down and it ends up basically out in the ocean south of Miami. It goes down several aquifers. The aquifer storage recovery wells are a bubble in one of the aquifers. It's salty, so it's fresh water. It makes a bubble and they can pull it back up. Those were two ideas that the South Florida Water Management District was looking at previously. How do you feel about those?
I think deep well injection is wrong. we really don't know the geology of Florida all that well. And there are some studies that actually show where they've used radioactive tracers where in certain counties north of Florida Bay, where they have some deep well injection on both coastline, show up in Florida Bay, miles and miles away. So I really don't think that we really understand the geology well enough. So I do not think that's a good idea.
It's one that I'm concerned with as well. Sometimes, Mother Nature knows what's best, so.
I did want to make one final comment if I could. We talked about water going south, and I want to bring up also that if we can solve the pollution and the runoff further north as well, we need two ways to do this. One is to control the pollution coming from the north by having some way to clean it up north before it leaves Lake Okeechobee, as well as something when it leaves Lake Okeechobee.
Absolutely, and I agree 100%, and that's one of the arguments you hear all the time from the folks south of Lake Okeechobee is, hey, most of the pollutants are coming in from the north, so we need a way to clean our pollutants.
Yeah, it would be an interesting study to see how much is actually being produced by EAA. I don't have that information, but I wouldn't dismiss it totally for sure.
Well, Paul, Laura, we are out of time this evening. Thank you so much for returning. It's very informative as always, and love to have you back again. Another thing we talked about is the LNG and the train. So certainly we'll have you back. Thank you again. And next week we're going to have Senator Gail Harrell here with an update on legislative session. Thank you very much.
I think it would be really interesting to, it doesn't have to be me, but I think it would be really interesting if you have a post-legislative.
Took me a while. I didn't even know where the function was.
On what exactly came out of the legislature. And there are people who actually put summaries together and have someone pitch that.
I would love to do that, and I agree with you, because there doesn't
So
even
now
be
we want
so
to
many
take the
bills.
ink pen cap out,
Everybody has kind of
top one.
Yeah.
their pet bills.
And
but
and now
let's
you
see
won't,
what
on the
happens.
Everybody's
headphones, you
so
won't hear
excited
the
all this,
bleeding.
and I'm going,
So when we make Ford hot,
everybody was excited
for
because they
Icky.
said, oh, felons got their voting rights.
Okay.
he
Yeah,
will
they're gonna have a
just hear
poll tax
the
or something.
microphones. He won't hear the
So
live.
this is-
So-
and then
Yeah, but
stuff
you're running
something
on
that
that
we're adding on a
Right.
caveat that they have to have all their bills.
The only thing
paid,
I
they
think
don't
we need to
vote
do on the second one, though,
voting
if it's
rights
okay
for
with
some
you,
of
because you're
them,
gonna use my
they're
audio,
doing
right?
And you have fracking, for
Yeah,
example.
you want
And I believe
Or are you recording
DeSantis
it?
is
We
going
can
to pass
record
the fracking bill, which
Could you
allows
say this one?
acidization,
Yes.
because he's going to be able to compromise, and he goes, next year. we'll
The only thing different I would do is,
Now, that's a personal opinion.
if you're gonna
Yeah, no,
feed it
we'll see,
next
but
week,
yeah, we're gonna watch that.
is let me